This House is in session. Prior to the suspension on the 27th of February, this House was in Standing Finance Committee. We returned to Standing Finance Committee.
This House is in Standing Finance Committee. Just let me say that we intend to finish this head by 11 o'clock, and this time includes the wrap-up from any other questions and also the wrap-up from the Honourable Minister. Proceed, Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Minister and team. Now, I only regret slightly not having been able to benefit from the momentum of the last session that we had on Monday, in which the Honourable Member for St. James Central posed some questions. Now, he posed his in perhaps a far more elegant and highly stylized way than I will. So forgive me if I end up asking the same thing. I tend to be a person of practical affairs, so if I wasn't able to glean everything from what he asked and therefore your response, and if I'm causing you to have to repeat, I apologize. But there are just some things I want to understand, but also to be able to give you an opportunity to perhaps stay or restate more clearly for the people of Barbados to understand where we are. Now, you did mention in your opening, Minister, the nationally determined contributions, where Barbados, like every other country, has indicated to the UNFCCC, that body that is responsible for climate action, how we intend to address the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that is so harmful to all living people and to the planet. We've said over and over that Barbados is, like most countries our size and with very little industrial activity, we are not major emitters, obviously, as a small developing nation. But we've, in solidarity with the rest of the world, made a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, in that NDC, that document that we call Nationally Determined Contributions, the commitment that we made was 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. The people of Barbados often hear quoted this idea of being carbon neutral or fossil fuel free by 2030. And I think, Minister, that I have heard you clarify, as has the Honourable Prime Minister, the member for St. Michael Northeast, that target is, I think your energy policy calls it aspirational. Practically, the commitment that we made was 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and I think that perhaps you may want an opportunity to be able to speak to that relationship, idea of being carbon neutral, and the issue of 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, because I would not want it to be a source of mischief or misunderstanding or miscommunication with the people of this country. But further to that, your national energy policy says that commits, for example, that by 2023, you will have 295 megawatts of installed renewable energy and 80 megawatts of energy storage. I think I heard UPS say that your watts and solar PV approved, so that 2023 target is not likely to be met. Likewise, there's an implementation plan with a series of actions that involve the erection of charging stations for decarbonization of the transport sector. It is a mammoth task. And my question is, are we on track to meet either of those goals? Given that you have indicated that you have an exercise beginning in a few days to be able to rationalize what it takes, what do you now see as the targets and the goals that you are likely to meet, and what is required? And the member for Christchurch East Central, the Minister in Finance, is here, so you might want to talk a little hard, as we say at Haggett Hall. But what is required to meet it? Because, you know, we have these commitments that we've made, and I want to be clear as I wrap up my first question, that this is not just about international commitments. This is also about a path to make sure that that Barbados is able to benefit from this transition. So given that we are already off target, where are we to meet the 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions? How does this rationalize with this notion of being fossil fuel free by 2030, which are separate? And what is the plan, therefore, to make up that gap?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. This is going to be, I think this is an excellent question, and it actually is the central body of work that this ministry is very much leading on at this very moment. There is no doubt in our minds that sometimes there is a conflation attributed to a 2030 target and what that may mean in terms of fossil fuel free, and how that doesn't necessarily coincide with what has been outlined with a 70% reduction in our emissions by 2030, which has now been updated in our NDC. Our targets. So I am going to share this question between myself. I'm going to just give a brief overview of what we're doing, why we are where we are in some instances, where we hope to be able to get, certainly within the next 7 years, and then what our longer range planning is going to be. I'm going to ask Mr. Brian Haynes to speak specifically on the issues relating to what we have as installed capacity and the questions that you raised as well. And then if there are any other follow-on questions, we can respond from there. But let me start by speaking to the net zero emission pathways that we are working through in the first instance as a ministry. We have a Barbados National Energy Policy, which was 2019 vintage. I believe the Minister of Energy at the time was the Honourable Wilfred Abrams when that body of work was started and then completed. That then continued under my predecessor, the Honourable Member Minister Kerry Simmons, or Senior Minister Kerry Simmons, when he was Minister with responsibility for energy, and the implementation would have started in 2019 and continued up until, well, it continues up until now, and the baton has passed to me. And so what we have started to look at as a baseline has been that very document. What did that document determine? And one of the things, for example, that we speak about was that there was no mention in some of our earlier incarnations about things like hydrogen, the utilization of newer forms of energy like hydrogen. Here, among this team, we currently have the National Petroleum Corporation, and that would be the third person that I will segue over, because the question of a bridging fuel that allows us to use natural gas as a means of using cleaner forms of energy to meet those targets is very much a part of our planning. And so there are a couple of key things that we've been looking at as a ministry. One, what is minimum access to affordable forms of energy for Barbadians and for the Barbadian public? How do we ensure that there is integrated resource planning? And that is the 2021 IIRP, which is also in need of updating, even though, as I mentioned on Monday, we are in 2023, not so far out. On the supply side, we are working also on looking at what our energy mix is going to be. What are we supplying to be able to fuel our industries? We're looking at grid, renewable energy, yes, so that is there. We're also looking at what are the existing fuels that we're using, including encouraging partners to transition over to fuels like LNG and even potentially even LPG, which are cleaner and less expensive forms of fuel. Then on the demand side, which would be our manufacturing partners, our industrial partners, our householders, what does that look like? How do we encourage the mix between renewable energy sources for householders and for commercial clients and creating that balance? And so the entire ecosystem, as we described it in 2021, has evolved. More so even what we described it in 2019. That then says to us that we are not necessarily on track to meet the 2030 targets in the way that we would have envisioned 2019 because of a range of circumstances, including falling behind on the installation of additional systems on the grid, and then of course the issues that we have raised about the amount of storage that is there. We were aiming to have, 45 megawatts by 2021, and we have 5 megawatts in 2023. And so there is very much a lag that has to be filled, and it has to be filled aggressively by the ministry in collaboration with our partners in the commercial sector, but also that brings us to our international partnerships. We had the option of looking at the Barbados National Energy Plan, looking at our national determined contributions, looking at the IIRP, and making the determination, Honourable Member, that we are a small island developing state. We're not likely to be able to meet the targets, and so we're just going to throw our hands up in the air and say, well, you know, we tried, but it didn't happen. But that's not the Barbados way, certainly not under this administration. And so our aspirational targets, we have put action to that. And it is on that basis that we reached out to the UN Special Envoy for Energy to be able to have an entity that is representing the United Nations, that is the custodian of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, supporting countries to work directly with Barbados to look at those instruments, look at those policy instruments, and make recommendations for Barbados on what needs to be done to meet the targets that we have set for ourselves as a nation. It may simply...
Honourable Minister, you have 1 minute to conclude your response.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. So what we're hoping to be able to do as well with that is to rationalize what level of investment will be necessary for us to be able to accomplish those goals in the time frame that has been set. It may mean that we may need to have far more aggressive investment attraction targets in order to be able to accomplish those goals. But I will hand over at this point to Mr. Brian Haynes, followed by Michelle Smith from the National Petroleum Corporation on bridging fuels.
Good morning, honorable members. My name is Brian Haynes. I'm Chief Project Analyst in the Ministry of Energy and Business. The National Energy Policy was developed in 2019. Since then, there were a number of iterations, changes that occurred within the Barbadian energy landscape. Coming out of that work, one of the actions that we were tasked with within the ministry was to develop the Integrated Resource and Resiliency Plan. The additional R in there was resiliency. Life isn't a straightforward thing. It is a very unfair game sometimes. In that regard, we worked at looking at the mix within the IRP, and that work showed that by 2023, we should have hit 52 megawatts of RE onto the grid. To date, we are at 84 megawatts. 108 million kilowatt hours of electricity was sold to the grid from those 84 megawatts. The challenge that we had is that of storage, and the grid, making the grid harden to take variable, increasing amount of variable electricity. In that regard, we have, with respect at the distributive level, met, and in some cases, the uptake was significant. It is at the utility scale that is where the challenge is, and we need also now to diversify into other technologies. So the Integrated Resource and Resiliency Plan, which I had mentioned in my previous round, identified that we would have put in place a set of actions that would mean that we would remove 2,758 million tons of CO2. So by 2030, that work is ongoing.
Officer, you have 30 seconds to.
That work is
your
ongoing.
response.
Thank you, Chair. That work is ongoing, and we are looking now to integrate other technologies in which we believe will help to accelerate the pace. I thank the Honourable Chair and members by indulging me.
Good morning. The National Petroleum Corporation recognizes the strategic placement it has with respect to the island moving from one specific activity of fossil fuel.
Could you share your
I'm
name,
sorry.
please?
I am Michelle Smith. I'm the Acting General Manager, National Petroleum Corporation. Good morning, Honourable Speaker. The National Petroleum Corporation recognizes its strategic placement in respect of the country moving from fossil fuel dependence to a more renewable energy option, and as a consequence recognizes the challenges that are faced currently in respect of meeting the specific timeline. As a consequence, we are ready and poised to provide the necessary support necessary to our ministry and to the people of Barbados to ensure that we provide any support necessary to get to the stage of us getting 100% renewable. And NPC is also working within its parameters to move into a more renewable energy option for gas provision as well. I thank you.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Andrew Giddens, Permanent Secretary. I just had to add one point to the question raised by the Honourable Member in relation to where we are in terms of reaching our targets. And while we cannot say specifically where we are, because obviously it's a dynamic process, there's one I would say that in terms of solar, like I indicated on Monday, we've really done very well in that, and we've exceeded expectations. As a matter of fact, we believe that, we get a lot more than we can, the demand is almost more than we require at this stage. But the biggest challenge we are having in terms of this policy, and that was indicated again, is storage, and that is being addressed. We spoke to that on Monday, and we don't want to repeat, but just to suggest that there are other things the ministry is doing to try to deal with that issue, such as vehicle to grid, which is a potential storage in terms of the electric vehicles on the road, and that is the work we're doing at this stage. And the other issue we're looking at this time is a virtual power plant, which really speaks to the ability for the utility through information technology to have access to all the storage that exists across. As it is right now, all the vehicles that can store energy, they still don't have access to that. So we're working on developing a virtual type of power plant, which will be more or less a software type of intervention that will give the utility access to the power that resides in the batteries and cars. And let me just say, it's not a case where the utility can just go and pull it and take it too. It's something where you have to agree to them, well, okay, we're prepared to give you our access to my power and that type of thing. So I don't want anybody to go away with the idea that, the utility out there can come and grab the power from me, you can't drive it. So these are the issues that we're working on. But the biggest challenge we have as a government, and we think that will create a hurdle for us reaching that target, because I think that is still not insurmountable. I think we're doing pretty well. Like I said, last week we have over 200 megawatts approved. The challenge is to get on the grid because of storage, plus 85 that is already on. So we are out, based on the projection that we did in 2019, out by about 20. The challenges, as indicated, is storage. As the Minister correctly indicated, we only have 5 megawatts on the grid when we think we should have out near 45. That is the challenge. But our biggest issue relates to the transport sector, which as an end user accounts for close to 4% of power we use. But what are the challenges? The challenges have to do with things beyond our control, which is supply. Notwithstanding that the government would have made provision for concessions for electric vehicles and things like this, we are still obviously having a challenge that the demand for electric cars and things like that is much more than we can accommodate at this stage. Additionally, the matter of biofuels, because the policy speaks to transition to cleaner fuels. It don't only have to be electric, but it can be a biofuel. But what is the issue there? That demand for clean fuel across the world is much higher than we even anticipated. So this would be the biggest challenge. Technology, this is beyond the government's control, but it's something that we believe we will have to relook at as we transition, because I think this will be the biggest hurdle that we have to cross as a country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. Sometimes we tend to think that we have to paint a beautiful picture of how we've done, but I feel strongly that if you don't say what you need, you won't get the help that you want. And I in that regard, P.S., I thank you for being very honest about what the challenges are. And what I do hear you to say, Minister, and your team, is that we are a small island state that is in many ways leading the world, not only in the ambition of our NDC, because there are not many out there that are promising 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Some you can barely get to commit to very marginal reductions. So I want you to take courage that you are on the right path, but I would also encourage you further to, I think that my theme for this year is probably fine work, because I find myself saying that a lot, but that you continue the fine work, the underlying work of making sure that you understand what is required and that you have a practical roadmap to get it done. Because targets are one thing, but we have to make sure we can deliver. I have a follow-up question that relates to the storage issue, which I have to confess gives me some regret is a strong word. But I do recall having the conversations with the previous ministers about the issue of storage years ago in my former dispensation in the cabinet, and making the point that it was something that we had to solve then, or at least begin to address then, because there was no way to move the sector forward without addressing the issue of whether you're looking at centralized storage, whether you're looking at decentralizing at the household level, what is the technology that you're going to use for that, the buy-all, sell-all model of the utility, all of these issues needed to be addressed. And the lag that we're experiencing is because that we regrettably created that lag in the way that we approach the sector. But I wanted, I know that the issue of tariff setting for storage is one that you're dealing with. But I wanted you to give you the opportunity to address those small and larger investors who are receiving approvals but cannot move because of the storage question. What would you say to those in the sector that they can expect in terms of having these issues addressed and what they can look for?
Thank you very much. On the question of the rate setting for storage, I'm going to defer to the FTC. However, just to be clear, the FTC is in the process at this time of addressing that issue, and I'm not certain that they would be in a position prematurely to.
Just to clarify, the question, having established that the FTC is in that process, the question is not just that. The question is, let me put it another way. Once that process is complete, are we satisfied that we will be able to proceed full tilt to be able to have investors who have received approvals? Is that the only obstacle to have that rate setting complete? Or are there other storage issues that we need to solve?
I think the honourable member between 18 to 24 months. Then you have the challenge of scale. A country like Barbados, which is in principle looking to procure a cumulative amount of 240 megawatts, but which we are not going to be proposing to do that all at once. But even if we were attempting to do 240 megawatts all at once, it is still comparatively small when put up against other economies in the world, and it puts Barbados oftentimes at the back of the queue. And so those are things which are outside of our control in terms of procurement of storage solutions. But what that has meant for the ministry, and this is one of the things that the FTC did speak briefly about on Monday, and they didn't go into a lot more detail, but perhaps they can speak about what some of the options are in addition to battery storage. The technology has been so fast moving, honourable member, that whereas we would have been speaking initially about battery storage and lithium battery storage in the last few years, now there are other options which are available on the market that would allow Barbados to map out its investment portfolio over time, 1 year, 2 years, to be able to get to the level of storage that we may need, because there are those in the industry, in the sector, who believe that even 240 megawatts is insufficient. And so the country has to be able to go well beyond that. And so procurement would be the starting point, but I'm going to ask the FTC to speak about what some of the additional options are for storage. And also perhaps I'm going to segue then to PS to speak about what any additional challenges would be. But at this point, we're dealing largely with supply chain issues. And that has been affecting things like transformers as well, simple things like transformers.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Dr. Marsha Athley-Akechi. I'm CEO of the Fair Trading Commission. I do appreciate the question, but if I can go back a little bit, just to give you a background. We do recognize that storage is a critical component for us to be able to get to where we need to get to, because invariably what we have are variable forms of renewable. And with that, it means that generation only takes place within a relatively short period of time, especially as it relates to solar PV. Wind would do that on a continuous basis with some lulls. With that type of technology, then, if we are moving to rely heavily on that, we have to have storage for those downtimes when there's no generation. The other forms of renewable, firm capacity, for example, would be things like biomass, waste to energy. We speak in terms of the Barbados National Energy Policy of having the policy being technology neutral. What has happened in our particular scenario is that solar PV has been the technology of choice for investors for obvious reasons. It is relatively competitive, it is easy to install, those types of things. I think one of the things that we need to look at closely, because it also calls for diversification of the mix. If we are to do that, That then speaks to the whole issue of resilience, because we have to look at this through a wide lens. We have to then begin to encourage investors to look not only to what has been the convention, but to look to the other sources. Although at the end of the day, they are, at this point, more expensive, we have to be able to diversify that mix to ensure that we meet where we need to be in the long term, and to do so in a viable way. Storage is critical. Going back to the issue of storage and the FTC's contribution towards getting that, we are responsible for setting rates relative to storage. We have that project is ongoing. We initially anticipated that we would be able to deliver on that by the end of this month. We are on the 1st of March. That does not any longer appear to be feasible. We expect to be probably like a month or so delay. And I will tell you why that is the case. When we are setting rates, in the absence of local information, because we want the rates to be reflective of local market conditions, we have to use proxies. In this instance, we sought as much as possible, as we did with the last set of feed-in tariffs, to seek to get that information from the potential investors, those that have indicated and have applied already for IPP-type facilities, recognizing that they will be required to include storage in their projects. That information has not been forthcoming. And for a number of reasons. In some instances, they had not contemplated that, and they've indicated that to us, and they're going back to be able to get that information to provide for us. But in most recent correspondence, they've said that information will not be available until the end of March. So those are some of the things that, although we have a policy, or we have legislation that speaks to us, gathering that information from IPPs, if they do not have it, how do we acquire that information? We can go directly to some of the suppliers ourselves, but that relationship
Officer,
is very
you have
different.
15 seconds.
I don't know how much I can do in 15 seconds, but I believe I've given you most of what you need. Thank you.
Last question from me, Mr. Chairman. Minister, and thank you very much for the explanations. You see, there's one thing you said that is very, very, very true, which is the dynamism that you're facing in your sector. That dynamism is also felt on the side of the investors. And so we're often grappling with some of the asymmetry of information, right? That they need to understand, well, what is happening in the sector that is stopping me? And I wanted to give an opportunity to address that fully. Minister, in your earlier remarks, you talked about the issue of just transition. The member for St. James Central, in his question in the last session, also made reference to it from the point of view of this notion of 30% ownership. My last question is very simple. Is the notion of 30% ownership more than just a notion? Are we seeing that kind of breakdown in the sector, in the projects that are coming before you? Do we have the appropriate platform or investment vehicle or mechanism to make that real? Is it real? And related to the notion of just transition, is also about the pathway to lowering the cost of energy. The transition is only just if it gets us to the point, not just of cost savings at the macro level of the government, of having to spend on fossil fuels, but if it also translates ultimately to the consumer, which is all of us. Years ago, when this energy conversation started, the theme at the time in the UN spaces, the UN halls, and the conversation was about affordable energy for all. That's where this conversation started, you know, affordability. So in your just transition targets, Minister, are we seeing the 30% ownership that we have targeted? If not, what will it take to get there? And what is the pathway really practically to lowering the cost of energy for Barbadians?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Let me start by saying that the just transition has to be central to everything that we do. It's fine for us to talk about lofty ambitions and what 70% may look like and 30% targets and what is a right to renewable energy, but that has to translate into the people that you are representing and the people on whose behalf you serve. And so certainly from this ministry, there are going to be a couple of things that you are going to be seeing coming out of this ministry while I sit in this chair. I, too, am a woman of practical means, and I do like the fine work. And so we have to make sure that what we say in presentations like this translates into actual actions on the ground. And so when we talked about, on the business side, for example, community literacy and financial literacy, there has to also be that engagement at the community level about what a just transition means. And I believe that the former Minister of Energy and the Minister with responsibility for the Minister of State of in Foreign Trade and Business started an initiative last year which then took the renewable energy conversation into the community. That is going to continue this year, albeit in a more expansive way in partnership with the business community, because we have to be able to take that to the people. The National Petroleum Corporation is here, Honourable Member. Let me give you a practical example. There has been a lot of conversation, obviously because of the discomfort of repaving roads in certain communities. My Lord's Hill in St. Michael is one of those areas that the MPC has been laying mains and doing work, replacement work, and the road has resulted in some disruption and some discomfort, regrettably, to the residents who live around it. The repaving of that work, of that road, was supposed to begin this morning and be completed on Friday. It didn't start this morning, and why? Because the MPC, and I want the representative from the MPC to speak about that, they will tell you that there were applications which were received for residents in that area to have access to lower cost fuel by natural gas and to have their connections done. And so they had to opt to prioritize access to lower forms of energy for natural gas for the residents in that community and not start to repave the road today. And so I'm going to ask Michelle Smith to speak on the work that is being done to ensure that communities have greater access to natural gas. Those are the kinds of things that are being balanced in this ministry and the agencies under this ministry to ensure that people have access. Now, the prime thing that we're speaking about a lot of times when we talk about access for people is also fuel prices at the pump. What does that mean in terms of gasoline for cars and diesel and what the fluctuations will look like? That is a matter that is actively engaging the attention of the ministry, and we have just completed at the technical level a proposal on what that could possibly look like, and we will be discussing it with the relevant teams over the course of the coming days and no more than a few weeks or so. But that is the kind of stuff that we're doing. Finally, before the chairman tells me that I'm out of time, finally, the question of
1 minute.
The question of access to jobs. One of the things that we have started to do in collaboration with a university out of Aberdeen in Scotland, as I mentioned, will be to look at how do we then create an energy services sector on the one hand, where new jobs are created that empower people, all of those installers, all of the people working on roofs, and all the way through the entire ecosystem. How do we create more empowerment and opportunities for people to gain employment as part of the just transition? But I'm going to pause and ask Michelle Smith to speak about MPC specifically.
Thank you, Minister. You captured the essence of what I'm going to say beautifully. What I can continue to say is that the MPC understands the mandate of the Ministry of Energy in respect of providing a low-cost source of energy to the residents of Barbados. And as Minister indicated, the MPC had plans to have the Mylarsal area and other areas paved during the course of this month, last month. But due to the requests from prospective customers, we wanted to ensure that we did not proceed with any works until we'd actually capture their needs. It doesn't mean that we're going to go and have the roads open indefinitely, but we recognize that when the customers are making those requests, we want to honor their requirements appropriately. In addition to that, we are doing some additional works in other areas, specifically Bridgetown coming up, as well as other areas in Christchurch Rendezvous and Maxwell Coast Road, Maxwell Main Road. So the idea is that wherever we find opportunity to provide a cheaper, a more affordable form of energy for the residents of Barbados, we'll do our best to facilitate those needs accordingly. I trust I answered the questions that were posed in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are all the questions from me. What I hear the Minister and the team to be saying is that while there may be less control currently on the prices at the pump, and there may be less control in the short term on energy prices, that the ministry is seeking to do what it can to create affordability where it can through, for example, NPC, through, for example, HOPE, and renewable energy at the individual level, and we look forward to continuing to seeing those kinds of initiatives. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central. Thank you, Minister and team. Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is going to be a short question because the Minister, I think, started to speak to it just now. Minister, when it was the last time, Monday, gave a very comprehensive explanation about just transition as a concept. The question I have relates more directly to work, and that is where the Minister started to address just now, and I'm asking it from the perspective of the upcoming International Labour Conference, including on its agenda a matter of the just transition in the world of work. So it is from that particular perspective, Barbados was instrumental in getting that on the agenda for this year. And the question for the Minister is, or has to do with, what are the plans or the opportunities, given that the matter of just transition is obviously a cross-cutting matter, across sectors, across different disciplines. What are the plans for engaging beyond energy? You started to speak to the engagement with business, and I'm also thinking about education, I'm thinking about labor. What are your plans to, as you drive the idea of just transition in all of its forms with respect to work, how are you planning to engage with these other sectors and maybe sectors outside of government to achieve a situation where workers can believe and can have the reality of being winners in this transition?
Thanks for that question, and you've gone probably to where my heart lies a lot of times by connecting the services sector and the services industry and people to sectoral development. And I'm going to ask as well the head of the Smart Fund program to come in, because there's a considerable body of work that is being done under that program, the one which just ended and the one which is going forward, both in the public sector and then beyond. So she will come in afterwards. But let me start by saying, as I said, this is where my heart lies most times, in the services industry, the services sector. We have an opportunity as part of the work that will begin for us on the 6th of March in collaboration with the UN Special Envoy for Energy, and I've spoken with her extensively on this subject. It's fine for us to map out what are the investment needs for us as a country. It is fine for us to be able to map out what will the energy mix be and how does it need to be updated and what does our roadmap look like. But the people who will then constitute the service providers that have to be able, not just as a consumer side, but the service providers who then create jobs, who create new businesses, who create new entrepreneurial initiatives, and who help to drive innovation in the sector have to be engaged as a part of our priority. And so what we will be doing with Sea for All, for the UN Special Envoy for Energy, is looking at Barbados's energy mix, looking at PV, looking at the various technologies that we are working on, looking at our storage mix, and looking at our policy agenda, and projecting over the course of the next 10 years What will be the new skills that Barbados will need to drive this industry? We've done it historically in projects funded by entities and international partners like the Inter-American Development Bank. Honourable Member, as you would recall, the Skills for the Future project was implemented that looked at the services sector more widely. And we've had versions 1 of that, versions 2 of that. We've had labor market surveys that said where are there shortages and what skills now need to be developed. And specifically for this ministry and for this sector, we are going to be projecting the growth of this sector and what job opportunities based on skills can be created. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, the beauty of the construct of this ministry where you pair energy with business and commerce is that we then have to create a framework where not just individual service providers are created, but that Barbados becomes that place that creates the largest number of businesses anywhere in the hemisphere, and perhaps even more broadly, globally, in the renewable energy sector, that just empowers people and creates for us to even become an exporter of skills globally in terms of our trade agenda. That's where we're going next, Honourable Member, in terms of this service economy that we are building out and the combination of energy, trade and commerce, and business. And of course, at the heart of all of that will be skills development for our people. I hope that answers your question, but I'm going to ask the head of the Smart Fund program to weigh in at this point. Keisha?
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Keisha Reed. I'm the program manager in the Ministry of Energy and Business. I'll speak a bit about the Sustainable Energy Investment Program, which we call Smart Fund 2. And this program, it comes on the heels of the original Smart Fund, which established the fund under the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited, which we've now expanded to include fund access so we can target more SMEs in a more practical way. But it also comes on the back of the Public Sector Smart Energy Program. But this fund, when it was first established, and one of the key things for this fund that we recognize over the years is the establishment of smart fund partners. When we first started, there were very few businesses in this sector. There were a few suppliers. And from the time it was established, you found that it was a catalyst for companies to come into this space. We started with 2 smart fund partners, which were companies who would do the energy audits and the assessments for the companies applying for loans and grants. And we've now expanded and we have more than 10 smart fund partners. And we've seen these businesses grown in some instances from one-man shops to be more established businesses. So it created that opportunity for businesses in this new sector, this new sustainable energy sector. But on top of that, this Smart Fund offers not just grants, but it offers loans for businesses to be able to not just do renewable energy, which we know, but they're also able to do energy efficiency. So a number of businesses have already invested in new refrigeration, lighting, and a number of these companies have expanded over the years because of this intervention. And one of the things we've included this source was for electric mobility. So companies can now transition their fleet of vehicles with resources. To date, since we've recapitalized the fund under Smart Fund 2, we have approximately $2.9 million in loans approved as of last year, and we have just over $200,000 in grants. So it had a bit of a slow start, but since we launched in March last year, we've seen an increase, especially coming into the end of last year, and we expect that trajectory to continue. But one of the things on this Smart Fund project that I like to call the low-hanging fruit is not just encouraging businesses to retrofit. The program also is going to finance government buildings. So we've done a number of government buildings over the years, but under this program, our target now will be 100 government buildings. We will be assisting some SOEs. We will be continuing that work, and some, general government departments, for example, schools, etc. But under the third component, which I think is one of the most critical, is where we have our capacity building and our institutional strengthening. And we have a comprehensive training program with not just for the public sector, but for the persons within the sector as well, within the public. And another new initiative we have under the program is called the Young Entrepreneurships Program. And I'm sure the members of Parliament will be interested to hear about this. We'll be selecting young persons from the community to not just train within the sector, but to also place them in jobs, clean jobs within the sustainable energy sector. So that's what the Smart Fund 2 is going to offer over the next few years. The project is expected to end in 2026. But as I said, we also have the Public Sector Smart Energy Program, which ends this month, actually. And that project, I know we don't talk about it as much, but I think we have a lot of good stories to tell because we've installed over 88% of the street lights have been changed. We've done 3 megawatts of PV across 21 government buildings. We're currently completing energy efficiency, and that's something that we don't talk about a lot, but we've done energy efficiency in over 15 government buildings, including this building that we sit in, Parliament. We did the lighting and the air conditioning here. So we've continued to do a lot of work with our partners within government and to also improve ourselves within government in terms of offering training and looking at how we can do things better under these programs. And these programs are both funded by the IDB and the EU, and the Smart Fund project was able to amass a $50 million grant, which was one of the largest grants we were able to get from the EU, and that was a testament to the work we were doing with them, and they were very excited to work with us again. Thank you.
Chair, just one brief follow-up. I thank the Minister and the officer for the very in-depth, I hear the connection within the ministry, and I'm just wondering, Minister, how do you propose, for example, when we're talking about reskilling of workers, how do you, as I'm going to ask it more specifically, how are you proposing to engage with the Ministry of Education, for example, with respect to identifying to them the new skills, drawing from the study that you referred to, and having the curricula then develop so that workers who have to transition can do that in a just manner?
Thank you for the follow-up question, Honourable Member. The work we expect will take, it hasn't been completed as yet, that has been incorporated into what we are aspiring to do beginning next week with the UN Special Envoy. So once that work is completed, it is between a 3 to 6 month process that it will take. Once that has been completed, it is our intention to engage with the Ministry of Education under the leadership of the Honourable Minister, the Ministry of Labour under your leadership, Honourable Member, as well as the ministry, the agencies which fall under my own ministry with responsibility for small business development, cooperative building, and so on. And on that basis, we are going to be engaging with our stakeholder ministries as well as with the private sector, and then with our institutions to make sure that Barbados is positioning itself for the energy future that is just and inclusive of Barbadians.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Minister, you have You have 5 minutes to wrap up, Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of the honourable members who posed questions to myself and to my team for their engagement on the issues relating to both energy and business as we would have navigated them over the past 2.5 days. I want to give the assurance to the honourable members, and I want to give the assurance to the Barbadian public as well, that the combination of energy and business is not just a lofty ambition for Barbados to reach its renewable targets on the one hand while supporting small businesses on the other hand, but it is meant to be a pathway of growth for the economy. It is meant to be a transitional pathway for people, in some instances out of poverty into financial empowerment, and certainly through our Scale Up program, about which we spoke on Monday, We are hoping to be able to transition people from the startup phase into micro enterprises, from micro enterprises into small enterprises, from small to medium, from medium to corporate. And we then want to be able to work collaboratively with my colleague minister in the ministry on the foreign trade side to be able to ensure that we can start by establishing many of those businesses all across the CARICOM region first, and then even globally in both energy and in every other emerging sector. One of the priorities that you will see coming out of the energy team, as well as we have mentioned, is that focus, and we spoke extensively about it, is on the just transition. And if I were to make that as simple as possible, it really does talk about inclusion. Inclusion of people who otherwise would have been marginalized, inclusion of people who would not have felt as though they had a stake, because they're not talking millions of dollars, but they simply want to be able to enjoy a higher quality of life because they're able to have a lower cost of living and they have more disposable income, and with it, effect growth in the economy. I want also to express my appreciation on behalf of the ministry to the development partners who have been working with us. We cannot do any of this, and the 70% reduction targets are also conditional on international cooperation. We have over $100 million in renewable energy projects with the Inter-American Development Bank. We have grant financing with partners, and it is through programs and partnerships like these and others that we are onboarding as we speak that we will be able to achieve our objectives going forward. Before I close, I couldn't avoid saying that over the coming week, we will also, as part of our energy mix discussion, and PS in his commentary spoke about the heavy concentration of solar PV. We will be welcoming a delegation to Barbados next week to begin work on a wind project in Lamberts among our team and in partnership with the private sector partners as well. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I want, perhaps on a more personal note, to express my appreciation to the members of the team that constitute both energy and business. It has been 4 months and a little bit since I joined this team, and I have had an absolutely exceptional welcome from this team, and we have begun to work extraordinarily well, and I want to express my own personal appreciation to them. We have a considerable body of work to do for this country and in the name of the people of this country. And I am confident that with this team, we are going to accomplish the goals and even more than those we have set for ourselves. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And thank
Honourable
you
Member for St. James South.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Mr. Chair, we beg now that Head 92 stand part.
The question is that Head 92 stand part. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report His Honour the Speaker progress and seek leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 20 after 11. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 20 after 11.